And this is what they looked like. This is, I'm pretty sure this is either further out Asylum Avenue as it got close to Parkview, where the wonderful park was on Woods Lake, the amusement park. Or it may have been out Portage. I'm not sure where this physical photograph was taken. But this is what the streetcars looked like in the summer when they had the blinds that went up and down. So it was actually a fairly pleasant ride. And it was nicer than walking in the muddy streets because we didn't have paved sidewalks. People had wood sidewalks if they had them. That's what all the marks that I talked about when I started, little marks in the pavement were. That was when people paved. The person or the business that did it would put their name in the sidewalk. They were so proud of it. So you'll see Parda Cooper and you'll see Gigi Sales, who also moved houses. George Sales moved houses and laid sidewalk. You know, all these names are there. And then the neat thing about it is that there are dates. If you can read them, you can read the date. And usually, the date of a sidewalk being laid down is within 3 to 5 years of when the house went up. So if you're trying to date your house, it's just one more little thing that helps to tell the story.
Did the attraction company, trolley company, also own the attractions at Oakwood Lake? That was often the case.
I don't know. Did they? They did own them. Yeah. Yeah. They. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we did. Just like Kennywood and all the other big amusement parks like that. Same thing. Now, I'm not going to do a lot about Rose Place because Julie's going to do a lot more in a couple weeks. But Rose Place was what I would call one of our first streetcar suburbs. Okay, Rose Place is located. It's going on and off. Okay, Rose Place is located between Vine and Burr Oak on the west side of Rose Street. And it's barely a block, half a block depth. It's got these absolutely wonderful little houses on it, about 12, 14 little houses. And probably half of them are this brick style like that you see here. Some painted, some not. I mean, they're just absolutely wonderful little houses, very compact. People didn't have automobiles yet, so they didn't need room for automobiles. Very few people had horses. If you were the sort of person that had a horse, you either needed it for your job, like you were a postal carrier and you had to have a place with your wagon and your horse, or something like that. You didn't, people today that would have, you know, to kind of put it in equivalent, if you owned a Cadillac, you might own a horse and buggy and carriage house, okay? But if you were everybody else, you would walk or you'd take the streetcar because it was very, very reasonably priced. So the houses are set very close together. They didn't need much of a yard, and this was, you know, this was the way they lived. This was taken by G.W. Austin, who was one of the most prolific photographers we had in the late 19th century, and this was his home. In fact, there's some of the other houses that are really interesting were taken because it was the house of the person who was publishing the book, not because it was that outstanding a house. This is a house at Charles and Blanche White House. Now, the really fancy house on the corner of Axtell and Westnedge that has the ugly white building attached to the front of it, Charles White married their daughter, Blanche. Okay, in 1889, he was in business. It was Olin, White and Olin grocery stores, and they were doing pretty well. And then by 1899, he was able to indulge his wife and to hire an architect to design a house for them and their son, Charles. And this house is still there. It's at the corner of Ranney Street and South Park. And the current owner has the full set of the original drawings, which if you've ever dealt with old houses, you know that this is a treasure beyond all imagining. To be able to have the original drawings to go with the house. But the house is still there, and it's in absolutely wonderful shape. Relatively minor changes. It's for sale. This is the house that, now if you cast back in time, and if you've been observing old houses all along, you will remember that there was this ugly greenhouse down on Westnedge between Village and Minor on the west side of the street that had what kind of looked like a cool tower. It was green and white. But other than that, it was just horribly nondescript. Well, in 2006, the Old House Network got together with the new owner and said, would you like us to take that junk off the outside for you? And he was very happy, and he said, yes, we would. And so we got together about 25 people, 2 sets of scaffolding, several ladders, and a dumpster, and in 4 hours, we took it off. And now, when it first got uncovered, it was very gray because it had been covered up for 70 years. But this is what he did with it. And it is absolutely gorgeous. So because of that, I did a little research on the house because I was fascinated by it. It's really quite a spacious house. Oliver Price originally built the house, and he had a successful tailor shop down on Burdick Street, North Burdick Street. Now back in that day, now nowadays we look at men's clothes and we say, oh, but they must have the crease to be proper, right? Well, at this time period, you had your clothes made by a tailor, and if you had someone pressing your clothes properly, there never would be a crease because that was a sign of store-bought, pre-made clothes. So there were a lot of tailors. This was that transition into factory-made, and because they had to have the crease to lay neatly on the shelves and to be presented properly and boxed up properly afterwards. So tailors were a different sort of person than they are today. When they very rarely make clothes, they usually just fix them. Then Charles Fischer moved in. Now Charles Fischer was a very busy man. He had an orchestra that went all over the world. He had bookings everywhere. I've got, and some of the rest of my collection, I've got calendars that he'd send out to possible clients and postcards. And boy, I tell you, once you mentioned to him that you might want to have him at your wedding, apparently you got a cascade of postcards until you signed him up, because he was really, really dogged, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons he was so well known. But this was his home for 20 years. And there's his little band, his merry band on the road in one of their earlier incarnations. They were down in, I believe, Decatur for this picture, and this was one of those postcards. Now it's a divided back, so it gets mailed out to everybody. And this was the divided back postcard of Charles Fischer and his gang his band down in Decatur. And then, ironically, the person who lived in the house just before Fischer bought it was a fellow who also lived at 714 Wheaton Avenue. And this is two of these guys, and I don't have the list anywhere, but I've got it, I know it's somewhere. Two of these guys in this picture are people that lived in those two houses and went to the Yukon Gold Rush in 1898. So that's why that is there, because everybody thought, I'm going to make a mint, just pick the gold up off the ground. And yeah, watch something about the Yukon Gold Rush someday that was nowhere near as, I mean, actually the Charlie Chaplin movie is pretty darn accurate, really, in terms of how lucky you tended to get. But they were an interesting period. Now this is the Union School. I'm going to do a quick run on the Unions, and if I made a horrible mistake, please let me know, Lynn, because I think I've got it right. Now the Union School was pretty much the whole city? Okay, for a while it was. And it was located, like I said, between where Old Central and Vine Elementary is now. It was big. That's a big building, 3 stories, and you saw the view from the hill that you could see it in the distance, 5-6 blocks away. You could see it very clearly. This is the Vine School that was for the neighborhood in 1882. Absolutely gorgeous, pretty much in the same location where the Vine Elementary is today, and I believe this was the one that burned a little after 1900. Okay, and it's a wonderful story because I was reading the Gazette from that year for some reason, and I came across the stories about how this little girl was rescued and everyone else was, it was a very, very heartening sort of story. Very nice. But so that burned down, and they actually got it rebuilt pretty lickety-split. And this is the after one. This is what they replaced it with. Now, when I started at the Vine Elementary a long time ago, the school that's there now, that is there today, was attached to this end of that building. And there was this wonderful auditorium in there, and you go in the Vine Elementary today, there's this blank wall by the staircases. There used to be another staircase that led up into the remains of this building that was still in place. And then they built that nice flat thing in like 62 or 63 that's off to the north side of the building now. And this is just a view of the same building from the front facing Vine Street, so you get an idea of the size and shape of it. It was really a wonderful big building, and it smelled different. I mean, old schools smell different today. You ever want to revisit that aroma? Go to the Kazoo School, because it still smells like that. Okay, now this is really neat. These are from the library website. This is graduation at Kalamazoo High School. It wasn't Kalamazoo Central yet because it was the only one. Kalamazoo High School. And I just love the fact that here you've got these kids who are bored beyond words with what's happening, and they're playing some sort of game going on. And everybody's watching. And I love, here's the parking lot. And that's the parking lot today. It's pretty much the same location. And if you see this long, low building here, that was actually a greenhouse off of Pearl Street, pretty much on the edge of where the parking lot is for Central today, for Old Central today.